G'day, this video is all about how I made this. It is a sphere, but it's been hollowed out, and I've hollowed it out using the Vermec sphere cutter itself. Now this project is not about, or this video I should say, is not about how I made this specific one, but more this one. Now this one hasn't been finished, obviously. That will happen in another video. This video, I'll get it up to this point, so let's get going. Now the first thing I did before starting the project was to do a drawing. This is a 2:1 scale drawing of my final project, and I found this particularly helpful to understand exactly what I needed to do. 80mm in diameter will be my final sphere, with an internal diameter of 70mm, which gives me a wall thickness of 5mm, and these steps, so that the lid has got something to key into, is 6mm, so that step there is 6mm, but I'll refer to that and I'll show you exactly why it's so important as we go through the project. Now this is my timber that I'm using. I've got it between centres, and the centre marks that I've got will be important for later on. So I'll just show you here. I've got a cup centre here, a fairly damaged one, and a spur drive up here, a steb centre effectively. So I need those centres, this one here and this one here. I'll need them later on. So we've got to mark them somehow and keep them. Now you also see that I've got the stand for I'll just get that back into place. I've also got the stand for my sphere cutter just there. I've just kept it there. I've taken the rest off so that I can get my tailstock in. Okay, the timber is black heart sassafras. It's a native Australian timber, or specifically from Tasmania, so it's endemic to Tasmania. These black stripes through here are typical of what well, it's called sassafras, but this is the black heart, so it gets this rot or this dry mould through it after it's been damaged in some way, and so that gives it a very nice feature. Beautiful turning timber is the black heart sassafras. Now the first thing I want to do is to get these tenons here smaller. I'll be using those tenons to hold the two halves when they're separated in a chuck, in a scroll chuck. And the next thing I'm going to do is to part this on that line. So I've already marked my centre, and I'm going to part that with a thin parting tool. So lathe going fairly fast, and I'm just using a skew chisel just as a scraper to get these tenons smaller. And then the other side. One of the things I like about using the skew chisel is that this angle here helps me get the slight dovetail on the tenons. That'll do. And now to part. So parting tool here, bevel rubbing, and lift the handle up. Now just widening that cut just a little bit so my parting tool doesn't jam in there. And right down to the bottom, I've got about, well, there it is. It's not quite the way it meant to happen. I was going to say there was 1/4 inch spigot left there, but there it is. Now this is the setup to get started, but I haven't got the sphere cut. I've got that out of the way for the moment because I need to do a little bit of work on the inside surface first. Now let's just go back to my diagram. I need to make sure that I get my internal diameter marked out. Now my internal diameter is going to be 70mm. My wall thickness, as I mentioned before, is going to be 5mm, so the outside diameter is going to be 80mm. Now I'll mark out the inside diameter first, and then I'll just do a little bit of hollowing out, and then I'll bring the sphere cutter up. So lathe on. I've got my verniers marked at 70mm. And what I'm doing here has been explained in another video, but I'm just using these verniers to get that diameter marked correctly, and there it is there. I managed to fluke that first off. That's my internal diameter, and now I can just do a little bit of hollowing out just to get things started. I'm going to use my skew chisel to define where that 70mm is, and I'm just creeping up on it. There it is there. Right, now this surface has been trued up and I can get my sphere jig into place now. Now we need to keep this, the tool rest and the banjo in place. I'll just get the tool rest down there so it's out of the way, and I can bring up my sphere jig now. Now this is where things get a little bit more complicated. What's important with this sphere jig is that you know that it's pivoting from that point there. There's the pivot point just here. Now with the Vermec jig, we've got a rod here that indicates our pivot point or our center mark, and that's going to be extremely handy. Now what's very important is that I get this center point at the right starting point, and it is not actually at that surface there, but it's in 3mm, so about 1/8 of an inch, around about there. Now the reason for that is this: I've got to allow some timber for this step, or the tenon, for my base, so that the lid has got something to key into. Now I'm going to make my tenon, my step, 6mm long overall. So in the base I'll allow 3mm, in the lid I'll allow 3mm, therefore I'll get 6mm. From this surface here, I'll start again, this surface there is this surface here, but the center is 3mm down. So there's the surface, and I've got to come down 3mm. So this point has got to line up 3mm in from this top surface. So that's what I'm going to do now. First of all, I'll measure the 3mm, or it's 1/8 of an inch. Now what your measurements are, up to you. But I'm going to use millimeters, and I'm going to go in 3mm. So there's 70, 1, 2, 3. There's 3mm there. Now I need to mark that. Well, I don't need to mark that all the way around. I'll just get a better indication of where that 3mm is. There it is there. And now I'm going to jiggle this sphere cutter around until the center mark, this point, lines up with this line. I'll get that out of the way for the moment. I've got to bob down here and have a look. Now it's important that, and this is one of the problems that I had earlier on, is that this banjo was in the way, so I actually had to put this piece of timber on shark jaws rather than the sanded jaws, just to get the timber further away from the headstock. So I'm going to lift that point up. It's just a little bit awkward under here, and I've got to line it up with that line there, and I just got to jiggle this in a little bit until that's in line with it. And there it is there, it's in line. The tool post itself, I have wound, as you might have seen on my other video that was a review of this, you can see that there is the adjustment on this sphere cutter, and I've wound it back to as far back as it will go, because that's how much travel it's got. So if you've got a big sphere, like I've got to go in 40mm, I've got to have enough, I've got to have at least 40mm there. Actually it's 35mm, not 40mm. So I'm going to get this up here like so, and it's going to start cutting in that sort of action there like that. So initially it will cut close to the middle, and then as I wind that out, it's going to go further and further in, or further and further out, and cut a bigger arc in there. So now what you'll also notice is I'm going to put this on a bit of an angle to that. And the reason for that is that as we pivot this around this way, we don't want this to foul on our wood. So that's about right. I can lock that off now so that won't pivot. I'll grab my 16mm spanner and tighten that up. So I've got to go that way. So I can tighten that up, and I think we're ready to go now. So I can undo that, and there we go. Let's see. lathe on. That's good, wind it out a bit more. Wind this out a bit more. Even more. I've got to wind it out quite a bit to get out to this perimeter here. Now I'll just do a little bit and then I'll go back to the middle. Now you notice I have actually straightened this up a little bit to get right into the middle, so I'll turn the lathe back on and now I can get into the middle a bit better. Now my problem here is that I'm fouling on that now, but what I've found is that it really doesn't matter if you make adjustments to the positioning of this, because what is important is that center point, that pivot point is always the same, and that's what determines the arc that this creates, this cutter makes, I should say. So here I'm winding the tool in and then cutting outwards. Seems to be working well. Now what is very, very important with this, as with doing the outside, is you've got to make sure that the height of your cutter is bang on centre, or else you'll get a little bit of a pimple down the bottom of your bowl or your sieve. Now I've had to make some adjustments to get this handle out of the way, and we continue now. Now see how that's fouling on that side there? So we do need to make an adjustment to that. Now the thing with this is that if you've marked your diameter that you need to go to, then you should, as you're rotating it, once you've got the cutter out to your diameter, your depth should be right. So now I can just tidy up that bottom. So I've taken a fine cut there, down into the middle, and that should be right. And there is hollow form. Now, what I could do is test to see how accurate this has all been by measuring my depth. Now my depth, I'm thinking should be 35 millimeters plus 3 millimeters for this spigot, so that's 38 millimeters. So there's my depth. I'll measure that. A ruler out, and that should be 38 millimeters. Beautiful. Bang on. Now what I need to do is to cut this step in here, and from this end here it's got to go in 6 millimeters, and cut that. To 6 millimeters. Now I need to work out exactly how far in I need to go, or where do I need to stop. Now if I go to my drawing, the internal diameter is 70, external 80, therefore the wall thickness here is half that difference, I should say. So half of 10 is 5 millimeters, so that's 5 millimeters from there to there. Half that is 2.5 millimeters. So from this internal diameter, I need to come out 2.5 millimeters. And is 2.5 millimeters. Now, if we don't get that exactly right, well, we can make up. So if this is say 3 millimeters, then the lip on the lid will be 2 millimeters. So let's try and get this close to 5 millimeters, or 2.5, I should say. And I'm going to leave it just like that for a moment. Right, I've done some sanding in there, and now I'm going to take this off and I'll put the other section on. So here is the top, let's say call that the top, and what I'm going to do is exactly the same thing as I did with the base, and that is I'm going to mark a 3 millimeter line around here. So this is my base and this is the lid, and I need to do exactly the same thing. So here's my center or my equator mark, and you can just see that there I've got to allow an extra 3 millimeters just here. So I'll do that, and the next time you see me I'll have all of this done. The only difference being that instead of the spigot or the step will be around the opposite way on the lid. I think I've managed to get this tool post angle in the right spot, because I can get right down to the bottom without the tool post fouling on this, and I can get right around to there without it fouling. So that's good. There's the right position. Now I suppose that this tool post position, or the angle that it is on, is going to vary according to the diameter of this, the diameter of the internal sphere. And I've just got to take that cutter out to the edge, out to my perimeter, and I'm going to do a final cut. There it is, outwards. So I think the cuts should start from the middle as much as possible, especially your final cut. Start from the middle and work your way out, and that way you should get the cleanest cut inside. I can get rid of this, push that out of the way, and get my tool rest back in position. Now here's a little trick for you to help you get this step here cut nice and square. And what I do is I make sure that the gap between my tool rest and this lip here is exactly the same on both sides, or as close as possible. So I get it really close, and then I just look across here and make sure that that gap there is exactly the same, or as much as possible. So I've got an even gap across here, and all I need to do now is make sure that I make a right angle between my skew chisel and my tool rest as close as possible. So there's a right angle in there. And if I maintain that, using my point, I push inwards until I get to the depth that I need. Now it is 6 millimeters. If I go a little bit more, it won't really matter. Less does matter, more doesn't matter. So off we go.